The day my father brought his illegitimate daughter home, she quietly tied our entire family to a heart-reading system. What she didn't know was that I had already lived through this once, already died because of her. And this time, I had bound her to a heart-reading anti-fraud system instead. When she faced my father, her soft inner voice pleaded that he must have suffered for years not being able to bring her home, that he must be drowning in guilt and sadness. What my father actually heard was her real thought. That he was an old man who let her suffer for over a decade, someone she would never forgive as long as she lived. When she faced my mother, her thoughts praised her beauty and gentleness, saying she was nothing like her biological mother, who only called her a burden. What my mother heard was pure hatred, cursing her for stealing her mother's rightful place, and wishing lightning would strike her dead. When she looked at my brother, her thoughts fluttered with admiration, calling him handsome and charming, saying she was lucky to have such a wonderful brother. What he would later hear was contempt, mocking him as weak, spineless, and easy to control. But all of that came later. On the surface, the girl my father brought home that day looked fragile and terrified. Her name was Ruby. She clung to his arm like a frightened kitten and shrank back whenever she saw me, as if she truly believed I might lash out and hurt her. Anyone watching would have felt sympathy for her. Anyone except me. I didn't welcome her. I couldn't. No matter how my father and her mother ended up together, the truth was that he betrayed our family. Ruby was living proof of that betrayal. And I refused to accept her presence. I openly opposed my father bringing her home and made it clear I wanted nothing to do with her. But Ruby's biological mother had already died in a car accident, and legally, my father was her only guardian. There was no one else to take her in. Standing timidly in the living room, Ruby looked at my mother with redrimmed eyes and spoke in a trembling voice. She called my mother auntie, and asked for just 1 month. She said if we still couldn't accept her after that, she would leave on her own and never appear in front of us again. Even if it meant living on the streets. My mother hesitated for a long time. In the end, she agreed. What I never expected was that it took my mother 5 years to forgive my father for his betrayal, but only 1 month to accept Ruby. Everyone in the family softened toward her within weeks. Everyone except me. It wasn't until my last life ended in a staged car accident, known carefully arranged by Ruby herself, that I finally understood why she had bound everyone in the family, except me, to a heart-reading system. They could hear the pure thoughts she wanted them to hear. With that system, she slowly turned me from the family's most beloved daughter into an outsider they despised. By the time I died, they were convinced I deserved it. Even after my death, Ruby cried beautifully, and convinced everyone it was just a tragic accident. But fate gave me another chance. I woke up reborn, with my memories intact, and one gift of my own, a heart-reading, anti-fraud system that revealed the truth behind her thoughts. So when I saw Ruby again, standing in the same spot, wearing the same frightened expression, I couldn't help smiling. I welcomed her home like nothing had ever happened. She was clearly startled. She hadn't expected kindness from me. But it didn't matter to her. She believed her system would let her replace me easily. She believed she was destined to become the Lane family's precious daughter. The moment she stepped inside, she bound my father to her system. She lowered her head and spoke softly, saying she knew her existence was awkward, and that coming home must be difficult for him. She repeated that if we didn't accept her in a month, she would leave quietly. That day, my mother wasn't home. My brother was away at university. Only my father and I were there. Before my father could respond, Ruby deliberately released her inner thoughts, carefully shaped to sound grateful and understanding. She told herself that he must have had his reasons, that he must feel guilty, that she didn't blame him at all. My father froze. What he actually heard was her voice calling him an old dog, accusing him of abandoning her for 15 years, and promising she would make him pay. For a brief moment, my father looked like he'd lost his grip on reality. He stared at Ruby's innocent face, then asked her what she had just said. Ruby blinked and acted confused. Then she sent out another thought. This one filled with happiness about finally having a father, and no longer being mocked by classmates. What my father heard instead was her impatience, complaining about her legs hurting, demanding to be taken to her room, so she could enjoy the luxury she believed she deserved. His expression darkened. He didn't expose her right away. Guilt still weighed on him, and he chose silence over confrontation. He called the housekeeper, and had Ruby shown to her room, then walked away without another word. As she followed the maid upstairs, Ruby glanced back at me, her eyes filled with pride and provocation. She hadn't noticed my father's reaction at all. She was too confident, too certain she was winning. She didn't stay in her room long. Soon she returned to the living room and poured me a cup of tea with trembling hands. She called me sister and asked me to take care of her from now on. Just as I reached out, she accidentally let the cup slip. Boiling tea splashed across her arm, reddening her skin instantly. She screamed. My father rushed out, clearly irritated. Ruby bit her lip and insisted it wasn't my fault, hiding her injured arm just enough for him to notice it. In her thoughts, she accused me of hurting her, but claimed she didn't want to tell on me. What my father heard was her admitting she was framing me on purpose and plotting to turn him against me. That was the moment his patience snapped. He shouted at her, warning her to understand her place. He told her plainly that if she couldn't behave, he could send her away just as easily as he brought her in. He reminded her that her existence was born of ugly circumstances, and that his tolerance had limits. Ruby stood frozen, unable to understand why everything had gone wrong. I calmly pointed out the security cameras in the living room. That seemed to reassure her. She believed she still had time. After all, my father wasn't the only one she needed to win over. When my mother returned that evening, Ruby rushed to greet her with shy politeness. My mother remained distant but civil, acknowledging her presence without warmth. Ruby introduced herself obediently and thanked her for letting her come home. For a moment, my mother softened. She was a gentle person by nature. Years ago, my father had been drugged by Ruby's mother, and while it didn't excuse his betrayal, it complicated everything. Divorce had nearly happened, but my parents stayed together for my brother's sake. They thought the past was buried until Ruby reappeared. Ruby's thoughts praised my mother's beauty and kindness. What my mother heard was venom, jealousy, and resentment so sharp, it made her expression turn cold in an instant. Ruby tried again, offering tea, acting eager to help. Her thoughts spoke of gratitude and devotion. My mother heard curses and violent fantasies. That was enough. My mother refused the tea and walked away, choosing restraint over public confrontation. Ruby was left standing there, stunned, unable to understand why her system wasn't working. I watched her quietly, already knowing this was only the beginning. She didn't realize it yet. But the moment my mother walked away from her without a word, Ruby had already lost half the battle. Still, she refused to believe it. In her mind, she was the chosen one, the girl with a system, the one the story would revolve around. All she needed was patience and one more ally. That ally arrived a few days later, dragging a suitcase through the front door during winter break. My brother Brian had always been close to me. Before Ruby appeared in our lives, he never missed my birthday. Always brought me gifts from school, and stood firmly on my side whenever our parents disagreed with me. In my last life, all of that changed after Ruby bound him to her system. He became her fiercest defender and my harshest judge. This time, I watched carefully as history began to repeat itself. Ruby acted exactly as she had before. She lowered her head, avoided eye contact, and hovered near the staircase as if she didn't dare step fully into the house. Brian noticed her immediately. He frowned, clearly unsure what to make of her, and asked quietly who she was. My father explained the situation in a few clipped sentences. Brian didn't say much, but I could tell he wasn't impressed by her meek act. That night, Brian handed me a small gift Head brought back for me, a silly plush toy shaped like a yellow duck. It was something Head bought on a whim, the kind of thoughtless kindness that used to define our relationship. Ruby's eyes flickered toward it for just a second. That was all she needed. She bound him to her system. Her thoughts poured out carefully, full of admiration and longing. She thought about how lucky I was to have such a caring brother, how handsome he was, how he must be popular at school. Brian's posture softened almost immediately. Then her gaze returned to the plush toy. In her thought, she admired it quietly, telling herself she didn't deserve nice things, that her mother used to call her a burden, and that wanting gifts was shameful. She told herself she would just look and be satisfied. Brian felt it all. Guilt crept across his face before he even realized why. He asked her if she liked it. Ruby panicked, shaking her head too quickly, insisting she didn't. In her thoughts, she begged him not to hate her, saying she just wanted the family to like her. She excused herself soon after, claiming she had homework, leaving behind the image of a fragile girl terrified of taking up space. When she was gone, I asked Brian what he thought of her. He hesitated, then said she seemed fine, just a little pitiful. That was how it always started. From then on, Ruby made herself impossible to ignore. She woke before dawn every day to help the maids make breakfast. She carried plates, wiped counters, and smiled even when her hands shook from exhaustion. In her projected thoughts, she claimed she didn't care how tired she was, as long as the family liked her cooking. What my parents and I heard instead was pure disgust. She cursed us for eating so much wished we'd choke and bragged about spitting into the fried eggs. My parents froze with their forks halfway to their mouths. Brian, blissfully unaware, ate enthusiastically and even praised her for knowing his favorite way to have eggs. That was when my mother finally put her foot down. She told Ruby to stop making breakfast and reminded her that we had staff for a reason. Ruby cried and begged to continue, but my father backed my mother up and ordered her to stop. He even dragged Brian out to the company for an internship that same morning, muttering under his breath about having no standards for what he ate. But Brian didn't hear any of that. All he remembered was Ruby's trembling voice and wounded pride. Over the next few days, Ruby quietly worked her way into his sympathy. She started telling him, through carefully crafted thoughts, that I bullied her when no one was around. She claimed I glared at her, spoke harshly to her, and made her feel unwelcome. Brian didn't confront me at first. He watched, observed, and slowly built his own version of the truth. Then one afternoon, he pulled me aside. He told me Ruby had suffered enough, and that I should be kinder to her. I snapped back that she was my father's mistake, not my responsibility. Brian's expression hardened. He accused me of being unfair, of blaming a child for adult sins, of being spoiled and cruel. I stared at him in disbelief. He had never spoken to me that way before. When I asked when I had ever bullied her, he accused me of subtle cruelty, of cold looks and deliberate exclusion. He said Ruby wouldn't lie about something like that. When I asked if he trusted her more than me, he said it wasn't about trust, that it was obvious who was in the wrong. That was when Ruby appeared, perfectly on cue. She begged him not to fight with me because of her, saying she didn't want to tear the family apart. In her thoughts, she praised him for defending her, and declared she could endure any injustice as long as she could stay. Brian's eyes filled with pity as he looked at her. Then with disappointment as he looked at me. He warned me not to make him regret having me as a sister. They walked away together, leaving me standing there alone. It was exactly like my last life, right down to the sinking feeling in my chest. The only difference was that this time, I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. Brian's birthday arrived soon after. The family threw a small celebration at home. Ruby never left his side, smiling brightly and showing off a necklace head bought her, a limited edition piece, had clearly spent a lot of money on. When we were briefly alone, she asked me if I was jealous, bragging that head only bought one and that it was hers. Sai told her to enjoy it while it lasted. She didn't understand what I meant, but the warning unsettled her. She didn't get long to think about it. Brian approached us moments later, demanding to know what ID said to her. Ruby's eyes were already red. She told him not to scold me in front of guests, then sent him a thought accusing me of insulting her, and saying she didn't belong in the house. Brian exploded, ordering me to apologize. When I refused, he called me malicious, and said he was done with me if I kept it up. I walked away without looking back. The next morning, with relatives arriving for a New Year's family dinner, Ruby began sobbing in the living room. She claimed the necklace was missing. While most of the relatives brushed it off as trivial, Brian panicked. He offered to buy her another one, but she insisted it wouldn't be the same. In her thoughts, she hinted that I was jealous and might have taken it. Brian didn't hesitate. He accused me outright and dragged me upstairs, ignoring my parents' objections. My parents already knew the truth. They could hear Ruby's real thoughts clearly as she congratulated herself for hiding the necklace in my room and planning to make everyone hate me. Brian tore through my things and found the necklace exactly where she'd placed it. The room erupted in accusations. Ruby played the victim perfectly, saying she would have given it to me if I'd just asked. Relatives joined in, calling me petty and ungrateful. My mother tried to defend me, but Brian shouted her down, accusing her of favoritism. That was when I finally spoke up and told them I had proof. When Ruby heard that, her face drained of color. Before I could play the footage, she collapsed, clutching her chest and gasping for air. Brian panicked and carried her out, screaming that he'd never forgive me if anything happened to her. She spent New Year's Eve in the hospital, claiming trauma. Brian stayed with her the whole time. When they finally returned for New Year's night, Ruby looked pale and fragile, earning sympathy from everyone. Later she suggested walking home. Brian agreed. On the quiet street, 4 drunk men blocked our path and began harassing her. Brian stepped in front of Ruby and fought them while she stood frozen behind him. I called the police and shouted for help. When the men hesitated, Brian grabbed Ruby and ran, leaving me alone with them. In my last life, that was where everything went wrong. This time, I knew exactly when the police would arrive. They showed up seconds later. When I got home, my mother was screaming at Brian for abandoning me. He argued that saving Ruby mattered more, and even claimed leaving me behind might teach me a lesson. That was the moment my mother finally broke. She told me to show them everything. I connected my phone to the massive television in the living room, and the room fell silent as the screen lit up. Everyone's attention locked onto it, even the relatives who had been whispering only moments earlier. The first video played without a word of explanation. It showed Ruby sneaking into my room late at night, glancing around nervously before pulling Brian's necklace from her pocket and placing it carefully on my vanity. The timestamp was clear. The angle was undeniable. No one spoke. Ruby's knees buckled, and she dropped to the floor, crying that she only wanted to be loved. That she just wanted our parents to notice her, that if I hadn't been so cold to her, she would never have done something so desperate. Some of the relatives wavered, torn between pity and doubt, and Ruby even dared to glance at me with a faint, confident smile. As if believing she could still twist the story. Then, I played the second video. The screen showed Ruby in the kitchen early one morning, the house still dark. She stood over the stove, spat into the frying pan, and laughed quietly as she flipped the eggs. The sound of retching filled the room. My father turned away in disgust. My mother covered her mouth. Brian's face went completely pale as he realized he was the only one who had eaten them. I didn't stop there. I told Brian I wanted him to finally hear the truth for himself. Right in front of everyone, I activated the anti-fraud system on him. Ruby was still sobbing on the floor, projecting thoughts about her tragic childhood and cruel mother, trying one last time to pull his heartstrings. What Brian actually heard was her real voice, sharp and mocking, panicking that she'd been exposed and calling him stupid for falling for her lies, bragging about how close she'd been to replacing me, and laughing about spitting in the eggs while he ate them like an idiot. Brian started shaking. He stared at Ruby as if seeing her for the first time. Then, without warning, he struck her across the face. The sound echoed through the living room. He shouted that she had lied to him from the beginning, that he had almost let his own sister get hurt because of her, and that she was never allowed to call him brother again. He ordered her out of the house immediately. That night, Ruby was thrown out. Because she was still underage, my father arranged the bare minimum for her to live elsewhere until she turned 18. No luxury, no family gatherings, no sympathy. Her system no longer worked, and without it, she had nothing. Desperation made her reckless. She believed that as long as I existed, she would never have another chance. One night, she followed me with a knife, convinced that if I died, the family would have no choice but to accept her again. She didn't know Brian had been following me too. Racked with guilt and fear, he tackled her before she could reach me, and called the police himself. Ruby was sentenced to 4 years in juvenile detention. By the time she gets out, she'll be an adult with a criminal record, and no one waiting for her. Brian has tried to apologize more times than I can count. He tells me he was blind, that he can't believe he trusted her over me, that he'll spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I listen, but I don't forgive him yet. Some wounds don't heal just because the truth comes out. What matters is that this time, I survived. This time, the lies were exposed before they destroyed me. I was given a second life, and I intend to live it on my own terms. Fully awake, fully in control, and never again at the mercy of someone else's false heart.